I'm so very happy to be invited once again to be present with you to celebrate and commemorate the life and times of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. I first came to Tanzania as a student on the 9th day of December 1984, when I was a student leader at the University of Nairobi, and the then president of Kenya invited me, among other students, to accompany him, and that is when I met Mwalimu Nyerere. I then, 10 years later, in 1994, visited at the invitation of Professor Harub Othman on the occasion of 40 years of celebration of leadership in Africa, and that is when I formally was introduced to Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere and his foundation. It therefore gladdens my heart that I'm in the country of a man whom I admire, and in a hall named after, and in a hall that is named after another great African, the Osagyefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. The subject that has preoccupied us in the last few days is one that is as topical as it is relevant: the rise or fall of Africa on account of the African politician. And in order to do justice to that subject and to remain faithful to my chosen subject, which is a call for hygiene in African politics, there is a sense in which one must take a historical journey, if only to appreciate the factors that animated Africans to seek to regain their independence from the colonial masters. Historians will remind us that we were first enslaved, that Africans were taken, and this we seldom say. The first civilization to take Africans out of this continent were the Arabs. And they took Africans from the eastern coast. And it's sad that in that part of the world, there are not many Africans who remained, because it was in the business of the Arab enslaver to castrate Africans. We never say that, but we must say it because it is historically significant. Then the Europeans came, the Portuguese came, the Spaniards came, the Germans came, the French came, the Belgians came. Africa became the hunting ground for the European colonizers, and we were the sport. We built, our ancestors built the United States of America. Our ancestors built Europe. And when slavery had lost its shine and sheen, the Europeans abolished it, but they replaced it with yet another pernicious enterprise: the colonization of Africa. The Europeans sat in Berlin, in Germany, in 1884, and they looked at the map of Africa and parceled it out. The British had their share, the Germans had their share, and Tanzania or Tanganyika was their share, as was Rwanda and Burundi. The Spaniards were Johnny-come-latelys in the arena, and they got little Equatorial Guinea and Southwest Africa. The French were here, the Portuguese were here, and we were colonized. This time round, they did not take us away. They came here and they controlled us, And they told us, not in so many words, that we were children of a lesser God. And we were treated as if we were children of a lesser God. In fact, they told us that on the day of creation, we were merely hewers of wood and drawers of water. And if anybody were to doubt it in 1948, it was more blatant when Hendrik Verwoerd instituted the apartheid regime in South Africa. But yet there is a sense in which the God that we worship never sleeps. The colonial enterprise ran its course, and the European tribes, the Europeans never called themselves tribes, they called them nations, were engaged in a war. First in 1918, the European tribes fought. And they had something called the League of Nations, which died. Then they fought again in 1945. And what is unique about the European nations is that when they are engaged in tribal wars, they call them world wars. So there was another war between 1945, 1939 and 1945, and after that, a new kid on the block, the United States of America, took the lead in saying that colonialism was something that was undesirable. But at that time, Africans were never quiet. Those who had been taken out had already started agitating. Many of us here will remember Marcus Garvey, of whom Bob Marley says, Garvey was a buffalo soldier in the heart of America. And many of us will remember W.E.B. Du Bois. Many of us will remember that they started agitating that Africans must regain their dignity and their independence. And indeed, in 1847, in Liberia, a small group of Africans were brought back in Monrovia, and Liberia became the first independent black nation in the continent of Africa. So soon thereafter, in Sierra Leone, they also created yet another colony. But Africa was colonized, except Ethiopia, which they tried to take in 1938 and exiled Professor Dr. Haile Selassie, and unfortunately they were defeated, as you remember, in the Battle of Adwa. Africa can defeat European tribes. This history is necessary that we are able to appreciate the freedom that we gained. So that Garvey came, W.E.B. Du Bois came, but there was another crop after the 1940s who had the advantage of European education. And there were people in Europe also who are beginning to recognize that indeed equality was necessary. And this was not anything new. In 1776 in the United States of America, the American state sitting in Philadelphia in the United States of America declared unto themselves that all men are born equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A few years later in France, after the revolution, they also recognized that we were to be equal, so that the colonized nations which had now taken Africans thought that they were safe. They had taken Leopold Sédar Senghor from Senegal to Paris, and they thought that they were creating a little Frenchman. Little did they know that they were creating somebody who would want to overthrow them. They took Félix Houphouët-Boigny from Côte d'Ivoire, and they thought that they were creating somebody who would be subservient to them. They took Ahmed Sékou Touré and Modibo Keïta, and they thought they were safe. Little did they know that they were creating the future leaders and agitators against French colonization. And it did not stop there. The Portuguese also took Agostinho Neto and Amilcar Cabral and Eduardo Mondlane to Lisbon. Little did they know that those individuals would be the catalyst that would be necessary in the process of decolonization. The British also had their fair share. They took others. They took Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere, Hastings Kamuzu Banda, Kenneth David Kaunda, and many others to the United Kingdom, Jomo Kenyatta. Little did they know that those would be the individuals who sometimes later, and in Ghana, of course, they took the Osagyefo, Kwame Nkrumah, and in Nigeria, they took Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sultan of Sokoto. There is a sense, therefore, in which these individuals started recognizing that having been enslaved, having been colonized, we now had to liberate ourselves. And the agitation started. And Kwame Nkrumah and his Ghana acquired independence in 1957. And I still can hear Kwame Nkrumah through the vicissitudes of time saying in Accra, Ghana, that Ghana is free and will never be colonized again. But the freedom of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. I can hear Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere saying that he's prepared to delay the independence of Tanganyika so that Tanganyika, Kenya, Uganda would become independent at one time. Mwalimu could see the future with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. Jomo Kenyatta and Obote could not. And therefore, we gained independence as separate states, and the story will be told shortly. So what do we see? The agitation, the demand by the people that we must be decolonized. And why is it that we were asking that we must be decolonized? Why is it that we were demanding that we must regain our independence? Because throughout the ages, it was always the divine plan that men must be masters of their destiny. And when we gained our independence, the leaders of the day were eloquent as they were clear that the reason why we were asking to be independent is because we wanted to take charge of our affairs. We wanted to be the governors. We wanted to have our young men and women acquire education. We wanted to control the production of our food through agriculture. We wanted to build our infrastructure. We wanted to improve the quality of the lives of our people by improving their health. We wanted to eliminate poverty. We were clear on what we wanted, and this message was as clear in West Africa as it was clear in East Africa, as it was clear in Central Africa, as it was clear in Northern Africa, so that if you listen to Kwame Nkrumah, it's as if you'd listen to Agostinho Neto, and if you listen to Neto, it's as if you'd listen to Samora Moses Machel, and if you listen to Ahmed Ben Bella in the Maghreb, it's as if you'd listen to Patrice Emery Lumumba. There is a sense in which there was unanimity that this was the only way, and we attained independence. And I remember so very vividly in 1957 in Casablanca, Morocco, was it in 1960, when the then 8 independent African countries met on the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, was clear that we must ensure that everybody else regains their independence, and that we must remember that the colonial master is not asleep, and that if we don't unite, he'll come under other guises through the neo-colonial project. But they listened to Kwame Nkrumah not. And even before they assembled in 1963, in the month of May in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, No sooner had countries started attaining independence than the neo-colonial project started taking root. And in 1960, the first coup d'etat and assassination took place in Togo when Sylvanus Olympio was eliminated. 1 year later, Patrice Emery Lumumba was eliminated. So that in 1963, in the month of May, when 32 heads of states and government assembled in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, there were several speeches, but 3 speeches stand out. Kwame Nkrumah's speech, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere's speech, and Emperor Haile Selassie's speech. Haile Selassie was the host. And his own inimitable style, he reminded the congregation who are present in Africa Hall in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, that was a momentous occasion, and that the long-term health of Africa not only required but demanded that Africa must pull in the same direction, Haile Selassie said. And Mwalimu took the baton from Haile Selassie and repeated the same words, celebrating the fact that we were independent and we had the opportunity of determining in our affairs. But the greatest of the speeches was that of the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah had a sense of urgency which everybody else did not have. He said, not in so many words, but in effect, that if we want to immunize ourselves from the diabolical machinations of the erstwhile colonial master, now turned neo-colonizer, we have to move here as one Africa, with the United States of Africa, with one army, with one currency, with one central bank, and with one nation. But they listened to him not. They had started getting used to the trappings of power. So what they came out with on that day in the month of May 1963 was a weak organization of African unity, the OAU, which many commentators were quick to describe in many ways and many times as the toothless bulldog. It was never a dog. It did not have teeth, but the effect of it is that it did not do very much. Some say it was a talking shop. Mzee Warioba, who was then active in political life and in other sectors, will attest to that. Yet later, we were to create another body, the African Union, and we'll have something to say about that. So we come out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1963, clear as to what we want to do. The African politician begins to emerge. We have them in different parts, but they begin to show characters that are totally inimical to our expectations. You of the Swahili say, maskini akipata matako huliambwata. Maskini walipata matako zililiambwata. They started getting used to the trappings of power. And we started having countries which we thought would liberate us. And I'm talking about the hygiene of the politics. It started disappearing. Many of these individuals now thought that they were demigods, suffering from what I call the Messiah complex, thinking that they had been brought to Africa to liberate her, and that they suffered from 2 major diseases. One of them is the martyr syndrome, and the other one is the Messiah complex. They think that their countries owed them. Africa started producing leaders that one cannot recognize. How many of you will forget Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic, that man who murdered little children in the streets because because they did not buy a uniform from his wife. That's Betel Bokas. How many of you will forget Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendu wa Nzambanga, who changed his country's name and presided over a kleptocratic regime? The Democratic Republic of Congo is the richest resource country on earth. Conservatively, it is said that under her belly, she has minerals, which is equivalent to 34.1 trillion United States dollars. And yet today, it is one of the poorest nations on earth. It is the only nation on earth which on the day of the election has its president saying, we know we ought to have elections, but we have no money to hold elections. When you see a country which has as its official name the Democratic Republic of Congo, know that there is no democracy. In fact, I dare say that any country, two countries that I know insisting on having as a part of their official name the Democratic Republic of something are never democratic. The other one is Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. It's as if when you can't graduate to be a doctor, you go to the church and you ask to be baptized as Dr. Mwadime. But that is not the point. The point is that who can forget Mobutu Sese Seko? Who can forget Idi Amin of Uganda? Who can forget Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia? And one can go on and on, because hygiene had started disappearing from African politics. Our agriculture was beginning to suffer. European musicians who had a little sense of guilt came to perform in Africa, Bob Geldof, to free the Ethiopians out of hunger. There was no hygiene in our politics. We could not run our education systems. Our young men and women were going to India because the budgets meant for education were consumed by individuals whom we had entrusted with the task of presiding over it. Our health sectors were beginning to collapse. And as I've said before, the political leadership did not have any faith in those institutions. Typically, the typical African politician, perhaps not in Tanzania today, if they were sick, they had a cold, they would not go to Muhimbili, they would go to London. If they were Kenyan, they would not go to Kenyatta Hospital, they would run to the United Kingdom. Tragedy, no hygiene in our politics, because Africans had started engaging in theft. In fact, I used to say that African politicians were thieves. Then I went to Uganda and I was told that they are not thieves, they are looters. And when I went to Liberia last week, I was told they are not looters. I was told they are looters on an industrial scale. That is the logical metamorphosis of the African politician, whose appetite for public wealth is completely insatiable. Hygiene was disappearing from African politics, and we could see the effect of the disappearance of hygiene in African politics. But there was always the erstwhile colonial master to assist. Coup d'etats started visiting Africa. Modibo Keita in Mali was consumed. Nnamdi Azikiwe in Nigeria was consumed. The Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah was consumed. Apollo Milton Obote was consumed. Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau was consumed. Patrice Emery Lumumba was consumed. Coups were so frequent in Africa that Afro-pessimists were now hard to say that coups were as frequent as breakfast. But even breakfast was not frequent on African tables. We could not feed ourselves because there was no hygiene in African politics. Your typical African politicians took the view that they had a divine mission to preside over their countries. They arrogated to themselves the monopoly of wisdom. If you listen to some of them, and I listen to the radio announcements announcing the activities of one leader of an African country, Habyarimana Juvenal, it would take 3 minutes to say the things that he had done. He was the leading farmer. He was the leading singer. He was the leading intellectual. He was the leading husband. And he was the leading everything. We had monsterized our leaders, and they became immune from any kind of advice. Meanwhile, the African was suffering. The African woman who thought that upon attainment of political independence, she would now deliver in a decent hospital, was still the victim of a village midwife. The African woman was suffering. The African woman who thought that they would now get water in a tap in their homes was still running 5 kilometers away to get water. Meanwhile, our monster leaders were laundering their clothes in France and in Paris. The African woman who thought that they would go to Kariakoo market here in Dar es Salaam or Owino market in Kampala, Uganda, and get all the goodies could not get them because meanwhile the Minister for Agriculture had agreed that bad seed be supplied, and meanwhile we were getting mangoes from Europe. The African woman who thought that they could have food on the table could not have food on the table. We had killed all our sugar industries that we may have sugar from Brazil and Mexico. And the African youth was no different. The African youth who thought that upon realization of independence, there would be occasion for them to get employment, was now being humiliated at the embassies of the United States of America as he struggled to get the almighty green card. The young African who thought that liberation would bring something new was now struggling at the United Kingdom embassy, filling a document that is 50 pages long, being asked who their great-great-grandfathers were and what enterprise they were engaged in. And they could not stop there. They went to the Australian embassy and to the French embassy, and the treatment was the same. The African youth was being treated like a leper, like a pariah, like a subhuman being. And they were asking, for what purpose did we gain this thing called independence? And those who are not humiliated in Gambia, in Nigeria, in Niger, were crossing the Red Sea, swimming across the Mediterranean to go to Italy so that they may be enslaved anew. Meanwhile, the African leader was busy looting from their countries and buying mansions in Paris and in London and in Florida, and driving private jets and helicopters and being addressed as their excellencies and honorables instead of being addressed properly as horribles. Hygiene had disappeared in African politics, and what had started happening is that a new generation of African leaders who were dissatisfied started emerging. And one need only look at Africa in the 1980s when we begin to see the emergence of a new crop of leaders who are saying, this is not what we fought for. And I can remember so very vividly Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi in 1984 abandoning his medical studies and pursuing the Deg regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, and he removed Haile Mariam. And there is a sense in which some hygiene has been reintroduced in Ethiopia. And I can remember here, God works in strange ways. Idi Amin made the mortal mistake of assuming that Tanzania and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere could be poked without consequence. He tried, and he died regretting it. And this became, indeed, many of you will remember that this University of Dar es Salaam became the finishing school of latter-day revolutionaries. John Garang de Mabior was here. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni was here. If they were not students, they passed through here because this was the mecca of political revolutionaries. Eduardo Mondlane was here. Samora Machel passed through here, if only for a few hours. Nelson Holisa Mandela passed through here. Sam Nujoma came through here. This was the baptism ground. And the high priest was Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. It was he who, in a manner of speaking, said, "With this water I thee baptize, that you may go out there and change your country." And Yoweri Kaguta Museveni went out into Uganda, and there is a sense, whether you like it or not, in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which when Samora Moises Machel left this ground, he went to Mozambique, and there was a sense in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which John Garang de Mabior left here, and some hygiene was beginning to be introduced in South Sudan. Right now, the story is a little different, but one can see that there was this new crop of leaders who recognized that indeed we had to do something about it. But ladies and gentlemen, what had happened over the years? Let us ask ourselves the fate of Africa. Why I say that there is a need for political hygiene. Africa today has 54 odd countries. And allow me to take you through a tour of Africa, if the moderator will be gracious enough to give me latitude. When you start from the Cape in South Africa, there is a great country which has given birth to great men. 1912. The first political party to be founded in Africa, the African National Congress of Sir Albert Lutuli. That party has given birth to the Mandelas, to the governing Mbekis, to the Reginald Oliver Tambo. There was great pain during the apartheid regime, but wisdom prevailed upon President de Klerk. And in 1994, we created what was called a rainbow nation. Mandela had his honeymoon. Then came Governor Mbeki, or Thabo Mbeki, the son of Governor Mbeki. Then came Jacob Zuma. I do not know where Jacob is taking South Africa. But from where I am, there is need for hygiene in South Africa, because that is a great country, and that is the anchor of Southern Africa. Nelson Mandela left a country that was called the Rainbow Nation. Today I'm beginning to hear them talk about the Zulu and the Xhosa and the Pedi. It is your own Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere who says, katika karne ya 21 mnasema tupande basi la makabila, hiyo ni ujinga na upumbavu. Then there is another country, because there is need for hygiene in African politics. And when one talks about hygiene, one wants to see improved agriculture. One wants to see improved infrastructure. One wants to see improved education. One wants to see that the quality of the life of our women and children is improved. And you go to Namibia, there is a sense in which there is some hygiene there. If only the land question could be solved, that would be a country that is worthy, is moving in the right direction. One can begin to see that. Then you move to Angola, that unfortunate land of Agostinho Neto, and you will remember Holden Roberto and Jonas Malheiro Savimbi. There is a sense in which that country was traumatized. I'm happy to note that President Dos Santos now says he's going to retire in 2018. My only concern is that he is sick now and he is seeking treatment in Madrid, Spain. Why don't they have a good hospital in Luanda, Angola? After you've been a president for 20 years, you are going to another civilization to treat you. There is a sense in which there was lack of hygiene. Then you go to Botswana, that great country. In 1966, Botswana was a backwater country with nothing but courtesy of an individual who knew that hygiene depended and required that you improve the quality of people's lives. Sir Seretse Khama. And you know, when you have hygiene, even the politics becomes hygienic. And you realize that politics is not a life and death issue. That politics is a question of the competition of ideas. I've just read a Tanzanian newspaper here which I thought was very insightful. Siasa ni kupambanisha hoja sio vioja. And there is beauty in that. And Nyerere put it even better in much more eloquent Kiswahili than I can master. He said, kwanza tutambue ya kwamba ikulu ni mahali patakatifu. But I'm still talking about Botswana, Seretse Khama, Ketumile Masire, Festus Mohai, and Ian Khama. They now know that politics is not life and death. That is a country where there is hygiene. For those who are Afro-pessimists, who think that nothing is happening in Africa, something is happening. They are monsters, but they are also angels. But did they not exist like that even in the heavens? Lucifer alongside Michael and Gabriel? It would appear that as it is in heaven, so it is on earth. And if you go to Mozambique, you can also begin to see that there is a problem there, but there is an attempt at hygiene. You go to Zambia, that is another country, Kenneth David Kaunda. On the day that he left office, Kenneth David Kaunda had only $8,000 in his account. If you ask your typical African Tanzanian councillor today, before Magufuli came in, that was pocket change. After 24 years in power, $8,000 only. Those are people who love their country and sacrifice. There is a need for hygiene in Zambia. It is the only country in the world that I know where when an opposition leader blocks a motorcade, it does not become the offense of obstruction, it becomes the offense of treason. Unprecedented in the world. Hygiene is necessary in that country. And I look forward to hygiene being introduced. Then one comes to Tanzania. You know, Tanzania, when one talks about hygiene, one must start in the 1960s. One must remember the Arusha Declaration and the nobility of the intentions of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And that is why many of you may not know, but at one time it was suggested that he be made a saint of the Catholic Church. And the reason was very simple. This was a man who had ideas. This was a man who had clarity of thought. This was a man who could see the future almost with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. This was a man who had the humility, almost like the humility of the carpenter of Nazareth. This was a man who loved his country. He made mistakes, and when he made them, he realized and corrected them. That is his greatness. Is it not Saint Just who said that nobody can rule guiltlessly? This is a man who found 120 plus ethnic groups and welded them into one nation, so that Tanzanians speak with one voice. You know, if you look at Tanzania and you ask your typical Tanzanian, what was the ethnic extraction of President Kambarage Nyerere? They do not know and they do not care. If you ask Tanzanians what was the ethnic extraction of the second president of Tanzania, Mzee Ali Hassan Mwinyi, the Tanzanians do not know and they do not care because it does not matter. If you ask them what was the ethnic extraction of the third president of Tanzania, Benjamin William Mkapa, they do not know and it does not matter and they do not care. And if you ask Tanzania what was the ethnic extraction of your fourth president, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, they do not know and they do not care. And if you ask them what is the extraction of your fifth president, John Pombe Magufuli, they do not know and they do not care. They only know that he's a bulldozer. But you go to my country, Kenya, God save my country. God save my country. When you meet your typical Kenyan and you introduce yourself as John, they'll ask for the second name, not that they may know your full names, but that they may identify you with your ethnicity and pigeonhole you accordingly. When you go into that country, which is a great country in prospect, but which is being destroyed by negative ethnicity, you ask them who the first president of Kenya was, they'll tell you it was Jomo Kenyatta and he was Kikuyu, and we care. We want our Kikuyu president. And if you ask them who was the second president, they'll tell you it was Daniel Arap Moi of the Kalenjin extraction, and we cared because it was our turn to eat. And if you ask them who was the third president, they'll tell you it is Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and he is a Kikuyu, and we want him to continue because we Kikuyus and we Kalenjin only feel safe when one of our own is in State House. And if you ask the opposition and you ask the leaders, from my own ethnic group, the Luo of Kenya, the Luo will tell you we have been marginalized for too long. The time has come that God must smile upon us and our son must be the president. And if you ask the Luhyas, they'll say the same thing. That is the tragedy of gigantic proportions. I'm submitting to us that the country called Kenya needs political hygiene. I'm submitting to us that the country called Kenya needs to come to Tanzania here on a benchmarking tour, and that the President of the Republic of Kenya and all our parliamentarians should sit at the State House and be lectured by John Pombe Magufuli on the finer points of governance. Of course, Mzee Warioba will be there, and other stalwarts will be there. Salim Ahmed Salim will be there. Great Tanzanians will be there. And Nyerere will remind us, katika karne ya 21 tupande basi ya makabila, ujinga na upumbavu, because it can destroy a nation. there is need for political hygiene in Kenya. Right now in Nigeria, the Igbos want to secede, and they are being warned by the Yorubas and the Northerners. There is need for political hygiene. But let me also say one of the things that relates to hygiene. Aside from negative ethnicity, there is another thing that has killed Africa and taken away political hygiene: corruption. You know, it would appear that we of the Negroid blood relate very poorly with this thing called money. Money is a useful facility that enables you to do things with ease. But if you allow money to control you and you begin to adore money and you acquire appetite for money, then you are in trouble. And I want to submit to us that Africa is the only continent in the world where upon appointment into political office or upon ascending to the political office, it's as if you have won a lottery ticket to sudden wealth. In Africa, when you are appointed a minister, even the newspapers will say if you are appointed to the Ministry of Finance, he's been appointed to the lucrative Ministry of Finance. If you are appointed to the Ministry of Agriculture or Mining, they say you've been appointed to the lucrative Ministry of Mining. But when you are appointed to the Minister of Culture, they say you've been appointed to the lean Ministry of Culture. In other words, there is a sense in which institutions in Africa appear to believe that he who gets into public office has a license to be a thief. And if you look at many African countries, many African leaders cannot account for their wealth. They have stripped their countries naked. You know, when I look at some of the great leaders of Africa, some who will not be remembered so very fondly by history, I regret. Robert Gabriel Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Nyinyi wa Swahili mnasema wali wa kushiba huonekana kwenye sinia. In 1980s, when Mugabe took power, it was said of him that he had the largest number of degrees of any leader in the world, and he had degrees. It was said that he was a passionate revolutionary, and he was a passionate revolutionary. It was said that he had liberated Rhodesia, renamed Zimbabwe into a great country, and for the first 10 years he did a good job. Then something happened. Different commentators have different ways of saying. Some of them say that Sally died and he married Grace and it has never been the same again. I do not know. Some of them said that he became a prisoner of some of his comrades. I do not know. But the only thing that I know is that all the historical dividends he had accumulated have now been squandered. Why? They have been squandered because Robert Gabriel Mugabe now presides over a country where there is 90% unemployment. Robert Gabriel Mugabe now presides over a country which does not have a currency but has a central bank. This is unprecedented in the history of modern civilization. I'm submitting to us that corruption has been at the very heart of the destruction of Africa. That is why we do not have roads. That is why we do not have good hospitals. That is why we cannot feed ourselves in Kenya today. We and Ethiopia, we are importing maize from Mexico. In Liberia, they're importing chicken from Brazil. And in many countries, we cannot even feed ourselves. We do not make our own medicine. Medicine is made as generics in India. We do not even produce our own seeds to plant our fields. They are being made by Syngenta and Monsanto. We do not produce anything because of corruption. but there is a sense in which one can begin to see some hygiene. There is a sense when I arrived here in Dar es Salaam and I look at the newspapers and I see a white gentleman having flown into Tanzania in a private jet from the company called Acacia, goes into State House in Dar es Salaam and literally almost saying, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Nimekosa sana, nimekosa sana, nimekosa sana. And President John Pombe Magufuli, as if he was a Catholic father, saying, nimekusikia mwanangu, nimekusikia mwanangu. Tutakuhurumia lakini kwa masharti. Na masharti ni ya kwamba lazima ulipe ulizozipora. I felt told that there is an African leader who can stand up to international pirates who for 20 years have deprived Tanzania of taxes that would have gone to schools, taxes that would have gone to the health sector, taxes that would have gone to infrastructure, taxes that would have gone into agriculture. John Pombe Magufuli is a breath of fresh air. I know that there are some Tanzanians who may think that he's disrupting their agenda. John Pombe Magufuli disrupt their agenda. For if you come into a country and you find a patient suffering from cancer, you've got to subject them to chemotherapy. And when you administer chemotherapy, the hair will fall out a little. There will be some pain. That pain is necessary because there is no gain without pain. I'm not a Jewish prophet nor related to one. I'm not a member of CCM. But if John Pombe Magufuli continues on this trajectory and has a second term, in the next 10 years, Tanzania will be one of the largest economies in this country. God save John Pombe Magufuli. You know, I was reading a tweet and some American is saying, bring us John Pombe Magufuli. And I was in Kenya and I said at one time that we need to Magulify Kenya. In other words, there is a sense in which a new English word can be found, the Magufulification of Africa. In fact, I dare say that even my own paper, instead of calling it a call for hygiene in African politics, I would say the Magufulification of Africa. And I would still be right. But the whites say that one swallow does not make a summer. There are other good examples in Africa of the beginning of the introduction of political hygiene. Ian Khama in Botswana. Ian Khama in Botswana, it is said that a minister in his government went to him and said, I've been named in a scandal, Your Excellency, help me. He told him there is nothing that I can do. The individual went to his rural home. The following day, it is reported that he had committed suicide. I'm not a sadist, nor do I intend to be one, but if there are such individuals, I want more suicides. Ian Khama is yet another breath of fresh air. Paul Kagame of Rwanda, 1994, the United Nations turned away the Rwandese within 100 days. Anything between 800,000 and 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus were killed even in churches. Then there came a tall, lanky man, Paul Kagame, and his comrades in arms. I was there 2 days ago, and one of the best drives out of any airport in the world is to be found in Kigali, in Rwanda. And you can see, so that those who thought that Africans cannot do it, our color is innocent. The Negroid, the dark color is innocent. It is not in our DNA. No. What happens is that there are some within our ranks who are errant, who must be punished. One can go on, but even my own good friend Yoweri Kaguta Museveni found a dilapidated Uganda. And even if you say that Yoweri has now stayed a little longer, there is a sense in which history will remember him fondly. One can go on, but one must also remember that lunch must be served. And if one remembers that lunch must be served, one must also remember that there is the law of diminishing returns. And one must also remember that one must now grow to their conclusion, even as they are talking about a call for political hygiene. So I'm submitting to us this morning that Africa can be great and Africa must be great. But Africa will only be great if we Africans do that which is good and right. The great Indian nationalist Chakravarti Rajagopalachari said that when politics stumbles, the country pays. So the first thing that we must do is to introduce hygiene in our politics. And now that I'm in Tanzania, the first thing that we must do is to magulify our politics. I know that there is a Kiswahili saying, mgema kisifiwa tembo litia maji, and I'm conscious that one of the names of President Magufuli is Pombe. But I have no doubt that President Magufuli will remain on the right course. As you say here in Tanzania, atabaki kwenye njia kuu hata chepua. I'm suggesting to us that we introduce hygiene in our politics. Which means, and Mzee Warieba will remember when we were talking about the Constitution, Africans must begin looking at their Constitution, and they must be constitutions which address the African environment. You know, there was a time after the fall of the Berlin Wall when European powers from London, Paris, Madrid, and Washington told us that democracy is equals to multi-party politics. Democracy equals to this. I now hold the view that while plurality is a good thing, a constitutional review gives us an opportunity to come up with homegrown solutions. Mzee Warioba, I'm happy that we did not have the constitution when we thought we would have it. You now have had the advantage of seeing our Kenyan constitution, which I think now has created an environment that makes governance very difficult. You, when you make a constitution, make a better constitution than we did. I'm submitting to us that we must now look at our constitution as the primary governance document in order to ensure that we create hygiene in our politics. First of all, there is a sense in which the electorate must also be educated. Democracy presupposes that the electorate is mature and the electorate knows what it wants. You know, 3 days ago, an individual from my ethnic group called me, and he told me this time round we are taking it. And I said, who are we? And he told me, don't you know? I knew what he was saying, of course. And immediately I told him, never, ever appeal to my ethnic sensibilities. I did not go to school that I vote individuals because they come from my ethnic group. Tell me their agenda on health, their agenda on agriculture, so that if I vote for them, it should just be coincidental that we come from the same ethnic extraction. I'm submitting to us that even you, the electorate, when you are called upon to vote, vote right. I remember in 2007 when I attempted to seek a parliamentary seat and I had a 10-point agenda with sera zangu. The people said, sisi hatutaki sera, tunataka karo. Then I told them subsequently that how is it, and I repeat it again here, you have been given an opportunity to elect. You elect a hyena to take care of goats, and then when the goats have been eaten, you wonder why. I'm submitting to us that one of the ways is having a new constitutional dispensation. The other thing that we must do beyond the institution, beyond the constitution, is to have institutions. You know, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, whom you now rightly refer to as Baba wa Taifa, said, you are not successful until your successor succeeds. Today, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere is successful because his successors have succeeded. Did you not have Mzee Mwinyi? Did you not have Benjamin William Mkapa? Did you not have Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete? Did you not have John Pombe Magufuli, who have seen and said, we must protect the sitting presidents? In order to preserve the nation, sometimes memories must be selective. I remember after the civil war in Nigeria, the young Yakubu Gowon, receiving the Biafrans who had surrendered, said, brothers, I'm happy to see you. And the commentator says, at a critical point in Nigerian history, the victor did not gloat and the vanquished were not humiliated. What Pombe Magufuli is doing is right. There is no future without forgiveness. There is no future without selective memories, but we must never forget. I'm submitting to us that the only thing that survives and will introduce hygiene in African politics is institutions. Because institutions will exist beyond us. And I'm happy to say that in Tanzania, one begins to see institutions. One begins to see individuals who are smaller than institutions. Because if you are larger than institution, then you consume institution. And Mobutu Sese Seko reminded us that when he changed his name from Joseph Desire Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu Wanzambanga. And when he died, until today, the Democratic Republic of Congo is not at ease. Beyond the institution, the other thing that we must do is that we must have men and women of integrity. These men and women of integrity are not angels. They'll have made mistakes, but they'll have learned from those mistakes. These men and women should be subjected to certain ideals. That is why Mwalimu Nyerere once again said, lazima tuwe na siasa ya maadili na miko. There must be taboos in politics, the do's and the don'ts. Tukiwa na sera huria, basi ni uhuni utatamalaki. I'm submitting to us that we must have integrity in order to inject hygiene in Kenya, in African politics. I'm submitting to us the fourth thing, that the other thing that we must do is that we must de-ethnicize our politics. And I'm saying, it doesn't mean that you reject your being a Sukuma or a Mhaya or a Luo or a Kamba. Celebrate all those. But remember that in order to produce melodious music, you play the white of the piano and the black of the piano, and lo and behold, there is symphony, and there is harmony, and there is joy. I'm submitting to us that in order to introduce hygiene in our politics, the quality of the lives of the people must be improved. The gross national happiness index must improve, not the gross domestic product. I'm submitting to us that the misery index must go down. In other words, young Tanzanians and young Africans must have the opportunity to realize their potential. They must not go out to be humiliated. You know, today, and if there is any Chinese in the assembly, forgive me, because the Chinese are an amazing people. 30 years ago, China was a third world country. Then they made a decision, and China will never be the same again. I want to submit to you, all of you who are in this assembly, 99% of the things that you have are from China. If it is your phone, even if it is iPhone, it is assembled in China. Everything we have is from China. China has become the factory of the world. They know what they want and they are going for it. I'm submitting to us that if we are to produce hygiene in African politics, we must know what we want. Nyerere used to say, wakati mwingine wa Afrika tunabaki tunashangaa na kuduatu. Wachina hawa. I'm submitting to us that China knows what it wants, and Africa must now ask herself, what does she want for our women? What does she want for our young men and women? And I have no doubt that we have the wherewithal to find out what we want. I'm submitting to us that we must also introduce equality and inclusivity. Our women must be given their pride of place. And I must say, you know, somebody said something with which I agreed terribly 2 days ago. Why must it be that when we are dealing with our women and our youth, we must create for them a microfinance? Why? For how long will our women be in micro enterprises? Why can't our women be involved in mega enterprises? I'm submitting to us that we must mainstream our women, because 52% of the population cannot be left in the periphery. And I'm saying that when you include everybody, when everybody is at the dinner table, then everybody will be happy, because the last time I checked, I used to think that there were two ways of being at the dinner table of civilization. And I used to say that at the dinner table of civilization, you can be present as a waiter or a diner. But 2 days ago, somebody told me, no, that you can also be the food to be eaten. So Africans, choose you now. What role you want to play at the dinner table? Do you want to be the food to be eaten? Do you want to be the waiter to be waiting upon the diner? Or you want to be the diner? Africans have been food for too long. Africans have been waiters for too long. This is the time to be diners at the dinner table of democracy. I'm submitting to us that we are not children of a lesser God. I'm saying that there is a tide in the affairs of man which, taken on a crest, leads to great fortunes. But if you miss them, it leads to great miseries. Shakespeare was right. Chinua Achebe was right. If you want and you seek, you will never fail to find. Difficulties may and indeed will exist, but it's through overcoming them that we grow stronger. And I'm submitting to us that we have the ability to do that. And to the young Africans, Chinua Achebe posed the question, where are the young suckers that will grow when the old banana dies? Are you those young suckers that will grow when the old bananas who are seated here die? Because the future of Africa is in your hands. Young Chinese are coming here, teaching us how to read Mandarin. Are we teaching them Kiswahili? Young Chinese are coming here working 7 days a week. Are you working 7 days a week? You artists, kuku can vaa raizoni, but beyond varing raizoni, the kuku must land and liberate Africa. You young Africans, why are you going to Europe and America? You young Africans, why are you celebrating Manchester United, not younger? You young Africans, why don't you have Sunday Manara and Gibson Sembuli recreated rather than Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi? You young Africans, why are you celebrating Julio Iglesias? Why are you not celebrating Farida Karoli? Why are you not remembering Baraka Munshehe Mwaruka, solo in his national? I'm submitting to us that in order to have political hygiene, we must also have self-esteem. Kwa Kiswahili lazima tujiamini sisi. Self-esteem. Once we have self-esteem, that we know that we are equal and that God in his divine wisdom decided the God that I worship is a God of diversity. He looks at a white man and a white woman and he says, behold, the great creation. And he turns to the Arab, the brown Arab, and says, oh, what a good brown creation. And he turns to the slitty-eyed Chinese and the Japanese and he says, behold, what a great creation. And he turns to the Negroid and says, I perfected it here. What a perfect turn. So that when we sit at the dinner table of civilization, it is the diversity that we should look forward to. And I'm submitting to us that once we've done all that, then Africa will be great. Once we have done all that, Africa will be great and Africa can be great. But Africa will not be great on the basis of pronouncements. I know that the Africans sat in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and came with Africa Agenda 2063. But Africa will not realize Agenda 2063 when 90% of African Union budget is externally financed. He who calls the piper calls the tune. That old English saying is still true. Because as they say in French, plus ça change, plus la même chose. The more things change, the more they remain the same in Africa. But I'm submitting to us that this time round, they must not remain the same. So, fellow Africans, and individuals who may not be Africans but are from other civilizations and our sisters and brothers, make Africa great. This continent can be great. Make Africa's education great. Let Dar es Salaam University be great. Let Nairobi be great. Let Fura Bay in Sierra Leone be great. Let our education be great, and we will make it great. Let African agriculture be great. Let us feed ourselves. Let us have food and beef and chicken and grains made in Africa. Let African agriculture be great. Let African infrastructure be great. Let us have the new train moving from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to Dakar in Senegal and from Cape Town to Cairo. Let there be great infrastructure. Let us have one passport so that when I arrive at Dar es Salaam, I'm not asked for my passport. Please, let us have one. Let us have one currency so that I don't have to fly for 1 hour and I confront Tanzanian shilling. I fly for 55 minutes, I confront the Rwandese franc. I confront the Angolan kwanza. Let us have a unit of currency which is uniform. You can call it the Afro, whichever name you prefer, but let us have one currency. I'm submitting to us that we can be great. Let us have our women occupy their pride of place. Let us make the Congo the Silicon Valley of Africa. Let us make Niger or Burkina Faso the head of nuclear power. Let us make Congo and the Kariba the production headquarters of electricity. Let there be light in Africa. Let there be light in Africa. And I'm submitting to us that that can be achieved if we introduce hygiene in African politics and African affairs. Let us have Africa Magulified. God bless you.
Naitwa Niki wa Pili, ni msanii wa rap. Mimi nataka kufanya tu tafakuri kulingana na aliyosema profesa. Na nataka ya maswali tu ya tafakari sisi, sio profesa. Cha kwanza, je, tulipelekwa ukoloni kwa sababu tulikuwa tuna low self esteem? Tulipelekwa ukoloni kwa sababu tulikuwa hatuna taasisi imara? Tulipelekwa ukoloni kwa sababu tulikuwa hatuna constitution? Nataka maswali mtafakari. Swali lingine ni kwamba ametoa historia ya viongozi wema na waovu. Je, swali ni swala la tabia ya mtu mwenyewe kuwa mlafi, kwamba kina Nyerere walikuwa na tabia nzuri na wakina Idi Amin kwa tabia mbovu, au ni swala la mfumo linamplace kiongozi kuplay role fulani ya ufisadi na mfumo wenyewe wa kifisadi? Swali lingine, tumesikia kina Nkuruma waliondolewa, kina Sankara, kina Lumumba. Kwa nini? Sio kwa sababu walikuwa kwa serikalini wanakataa kula rushwa. Waliondolewa kwa sababu walikuwa wanataka kuvunja mfumo wa kinyonyaji wa uchumi. Tusipoteze hiyo point. Kwa hiyo ukombozi wetu ni kubadilisha kiongozi, tusubiri aje kiongozi mwema, au ni kubadilisha mfumo wenyewe mzima? Tunasema tutengeneze katiba. Katiba ni mchakato wa kirasimu. Ni mchakato wa tabaka gani? Tabaka gani litahozi mazungumzo ya katiba na litawakilisha interest ya kina nani? Tunasema tutengeneze taasisi. Taasisi katika fikra zipi? Kwa sababu hiyo lugha ya taasisi inaongelewa na wakubwa World Bank wote wanaongea. Au taasisi katika lugha ya mwalimu ya kusema vijiji ndio vituo vya demokrasia, vituo vya maendeleo, au vituo vya mamlaka. Je, tatizo ni rushwa au ni mfumo mzima? Kwa mfano mimi nagombea ubunge, natafuta hela za kampeni kuwa mbunge. Chama kinagombea urais, natafuta hela za kampeni kuchukua madaraka. Hizo hela wanapata kwa nani? Wanapokuja kupata mamlaka, hiyo mikataba waenda kufanya kwa nani? Kwa hiyo kumbe huo mfumo wenyewe wa demokrasia ni tool, ni chombo cha kufanikisha huo mfumo mzima wa unyonyaji ufanye kazi. Kwa hiyo profesa ameongea vizuri sana, lakini kwangu mimi nasema ukombozi wa Afrika hautaletwa na Mesaya, Masi. Hata ukiwasoma kina Mwalimu, kina Cabral, kina Sankara, waliogopa sana hiyo dhana ya umasi ambao sisi wote tunaiabudu. Leo tumejaa kwa sababu anakuja Profesa Lumumba. Ni dhana ya umasi. Hakuna wakulima hapa wamekuja kutoa mada. Hao ndio wanaishi umaskini kila siku. Hakuna wakonda, hakuna wapiga debe. Kuna hiyo hierarchy ya kuhodhi maarifa. Sisi wasomi ndio tutaongea. Wale wanyonge tumewaacha. Kwa hiyo kwangu mimi nataka kukazia kwamba mapinduzi pekee ambayo yataikomboa Afrika kwanza ni kuvunja huo mfumo mzima wa uchumi na kubadilisha mfumo kama Mwalimu alivyotaka kubadilisha mfumo. Turudishe nguvu kwa wananchi. Tukumbuke mapinduzi ya Afrika yalipigwa na wananchi, lakini viongozi walipokuja kuyashika na kukaa kwenye mikutano waliwalagai na kuwauza wananchi. Tunatengeneza taasisi, lakini Mwalimu alisema taasisi za demokrasia. Kwa sababu nzako ni taasisi lakini ni chombo cha ubepari. Kwa hiyo kwangu mimi naungana na profesa kwamba tumeona viongozi wachafu, lakini mfumo unawapa fursa za kuwa wachafu. Kwa hiyo lazima tuelewe mfumo mzima unafanyaje kazi na tools zake ni zipi. Mimi naogopa sana hizo lugha za taasisi, equality, kwa sababu wakoloni ni lugha zao hizo. Katiba na kila kitu. Kwa mimi narudi kwa sababu ilimfanya Sankara akawawa Hani wa South Africa, akawawa Lipumba kwa sababu walitaka kubadili mfumo wa kiuchumi. Na ni lazima uanze na dira kubwa kama Mwalimu alibadilisha elimu, alibadilisha siasa na kila kitu, kutengeneza mfumo mpya. Kama ambavyo wazungu walivyotoka kwenye ukabaila kwenda kwenye ubepari, waliua mfumo mzima wa ubepari. Kwa hiyo kama tunataka turudi, lazima tuue mfumo mzima wa unyonyaji na tools zake zote. Tutengeneze mfumo mpya ndio tutaweza kutoka. Lakini hizo lugha za katiba na nini, hizo ni lugha za warasimu. Asante sana.
I'm Dr. Wale Okedino, a former member of the parliament from Nigeria. And I have two questions for you. When you are making your beautiful presentation, you condemned President Mugabe for staying too long. But you are partial to Museveni and Paul Kagame. Are you trying to tell us that we can allow a little extension of office for our leaders? Or how do we do this? Thank you.
Thank you. I am Dr. Camillus Kasala of the Eastern Africa Statistical Training Center. I have followed Professor Lumumba's presentation. I would like to submit to us that this, what I'm going to say, will be the summary of his presentation, very short. There is no hygiene in African politics because of what I call the not always vicious circle. This circle begins with what is logical in African politics is not always practical. What is practical is not always right. What is right is not always ethical. What is ethical is not always desired. And what is desired takes us back to what is not always logical. Now, what is the hygiene? Mwalimu Nyerere avoided what I call temptations of 5 P's. And I would like the young people here to listen very, very carefully, because the world today is everywhere broadcasting these 5P temptations. Please, future African leaders, the young people, avoid the first P. Avoid being the victim of the first P. The first P is power. Avoid being the victim of the second P, property. Avoid being the victim of the third P, prestige. Avoid being the victim of the fourth P, popularity. And avoid being the victim of the last P, pomposity. Waswahili wanaita mbwe mbwe. Mziepuke hizo zote. Asante sana.
Thank you very much. I believe I can answer from here. Let me start with the last question that you posed. And as I grow older, I hold the view that my answers do not necessarily represent the truth. This is my view of the issues. Opposition in modern day Africa is very reasoned. If you look at the first leaders, the whole idea of building the nation they thought could best be articulated by having one-party state. They said, we are so fragile, we are so diverse, that we must have one political party. And there is a sense in which they were right. If you look at your typical European nation, and I want you to look at Europe from Sweden, there will invariably be nation states. If you go to Sweden, they are the Swedes with a small Lapp or Sami population. And you'll find they have a small parliament for them. If you go to Norway, you'll discover they are Norwegians, almost 99%. If you go to Finland, the bulk of them are the Finns with a small Swedish population. If you go to Denmark, they are the Danes. If you go to the Netherlands, they are the Dutch. If you go to Spain, where there are a multiplicity of ethnicities, then there are problems. You have a problem, you remember, during the reign of General Franco of the Basque country, even up till now, the Catalans, the Galicians. So there is a sense in which Europe, in fact, I dare say, Africa handles diversity better than Europe does. If you go to the Baltics, you find the former Yugoslavia, which has produced several countries from Yugoslavia. You have the Slovenes, the Bosnians, the Herzegovina. There is a sense the Soviet Union collapsed before our very eyes. But Africa somehow, and this was once again, many of you will remember in 1963, the Addis Ababa conference, and 1964, the Cairo conference, what is normally referred to as the Nasserite Nyerereist Nkrumahist approach. that we should not redraw African boundaries because it would create conflict. And there was a sense, therefore, that if you came to many African countries, they say, let us have one-party states. And many of the party states, the states or the parties that took over power were revolutionary parties. They were freedom-fighting parties. If you came to Kenya, African National Union, in Tanzania, TANU and Afro-Shirazi, in South Africa, African National Congress, MPLA, FRELIMO, ZANU-PF, and all these parties. And they took the view, let us have one party so that everybody is under the umbrella of that party to avoid ethnic division. And one may quarrel about that particular approach, but if you look at it, there was merit in it. Then, of course, Europe persuaded us. Europe is always in the business of persuading us that you cannot have democracy when there is only one party, and that therefore we have multi-party politics. And many African countries were dragged wailing and kicking to this dinner table of multi-partyism. Nyerere was one of the cleverer ones. He did it before everybody did it and said, let us admit it. And you had NCCR, Mageuzi, Chadema, and all those parties. But the net effect is that the African politician is a very conflicted individual. Because on the one hand, he has culture and tradition defining how he behaves, but on the one hand, he also wants to behave as if he is a typical British or Dutch politician. So I say sometimes that when you look at an African politician, he suffers from split personality. And I say this in all seriousness. What the African politicians in many countries say on the platform is not what they believe in. And our own president, former President Daniel Moi, used to say it very well. After he had read the English speech, he would say, nimesema hayo nimesema, sasa wacha niseme. In other words, there are things that you say for the comfort and benefit of the so-called modern society and for Europe and America and Washington to hear, but there are things that you now say to wazawa. And those things are different. So multi-party politics, because when you introduce multi-party politics, the assumption is that there are clear ideological differences. If you go to Europe and America and you talk about the Tories, there are ways in which they believe that government must be run in this way. You go to the United States of America, there are sense in which the Republicans have a way in which they think government should be run. If you go to different countries, but if you come to Tanzania, what is it that Chadema wants to do that is different from CCM? What is it that NCCR Mageuzi wants to do that is different from CCM? If you look at them, the difference is possibly 1%. If you go to Kenya, where we have 63 political parties, if you ask these individuals, what do you want to do? They'll tell you we hold the view. They'll not tell you in so many words. I'm the one who normally says it on national television. They hold the view that because the present administration is an administration that has brought together the Kikuyus and the Kalenjins, the next combination should now have the Luos and the Luhyas and the Kambas and a little Masai, so that essentially the election we'll have in the month of August on the 8th, as I've said rather harshly and bluntly, is not an election on issues. It is an ethnic census to determine whether a combination of Kikuyus and Kalenjins is larger than that of Luos, Luhyas, and Kambas, or vice versa. And if you look at how they have divided it, they have actually said it. If you look at our typical Kenyan politician, he says, we the Luos, it is our turn now. We the Luhyas, it is our turn now. So that when we talk about opposition, running an African country is not very easy. If you go to Angola, it is the Ovambo and the Ovimbundu. If you go to South Africa, it's the same thing. You've got to ensure that Zuma is the president because you've got to settle the spirits of the Zulu. If you go to Nigeria, right now the Igbo think they're excluded. And if General Buhari is unwell, the talk is already there. Will Osinbajo take over, or will it be a northerner? Rather premature, if you ask me. So what is opposition? If I was the president of a country, this is what I would do. Recognizing that African countries are fragile, I would have monthly meetings with all opposition leaders. Monthly. Because some of these opposition leaders, the truth be told, what they want is to be heard. They want to have an opportunity to contribute to the entire national enterprise. And they have good ideas, some of them. Ingawa wengine ni wababaishaji tu. But in many ways, they have good ideas. And I think that there is a sense, if you look at an article that has been written by Mwalimu Nyerere a while ago, he says, if you read more, you become more enlightened. There is a sense in which that is what African leaders forget to do. Mandela tried to do it when he was the president. One day, when he went out, he appointed Gacha Buthelezi to be the president. And Gacha, I think, was very satisfied during those few days. So one of the things that we must realize, opposition and government, is that we are working and moving in the same direction. So my prescription, whether it's taken or not, is another debate. Ensure that these individuals are involved. Have quarterly meetings with all of them. Tell them, this is how you tell us how to run government. In fact, in many African countries, what I would do is to ask the opposition leader, I'm putting together my government. Do you have any problem with being appointed into my cabinet to serve so that these beautiful ideas, we mix mine with yours and we govern Tanzania? That would be my approach. And I think in that way, the opposition then becomes responsible. It becomes the loyal, responsible opposition. Otherwise, the opposition then exists to oppose everything and to propose nothing. And you can kill that by involvement. So that is my answer to that question. The second question is about foundation. Let me give an example. I was listening to a debate by the former head of UNIDO, who is a Sierra Leonean and is contesting to the president. And I said to a friend of mine, if this man has these ideas and I was Sierra Leone, I would vote him. He said, Africa can realize our potential. And this idea that Africa has had conflict is misguided. And he gave examples. Vietnam was at war. Cambodia was at war. Laos was at war. The two Koreas were at war in 1953. Japan was bombed to the ground in 1945. Yet they have revived. They went back to the foundation that you talked about. In other words, we know the true north, tunadira. And Mwalimu used to say in Kiswahili, siri ya maendeleo ni watu, ardhi na siasa safi. And siasa safi means that you have the maadili. Mzee has already, in fact, Mzee, the next time I'm called, I'm going to Uganda and I'm going to use the 5 P's and I'll say I heard them from you. Because in truth, if you look at those 5 P's, that is the problem. Umejua ukizungumzia hili swala la mamlaka, Mwafrika, kiongozi Mwafrika kwanza katika hafla kama hii, kiongozi asili wa Kiafrika ukimwalika saa 4 anakuja saa 5. Na yuko tu katika mkahawa anapiga simu, je, wametulia hapo? Wametulia kabisa. Basi wakisha tulia anaambiwa wametulia, sasa anakuja na mbwembwe na ving'ora. Na mikia wanyama pia wanatingisha hivi. They think that that is what will make them important. That is power ambayo unaizungumzia. Na swala hili la kuhodhi na kumiliki mali, unapata mtu ana vyumba vingi tu. Na umejua kilichoko katika kuhodhi mali huku ni kama kunywa maji ya chumvi. Kadri unavyokunywa ndivyo unavyotaka zaidi. Haisitiri, mtu ana nyumba nyingi tu. 40 katika Dar es Salaam, nilisoma hivi karibuni, mmoja wa TAKUKURU alipatikana na nyumba nyingi tu. Mtu kama huyo, ni kitu kipi anakitaka huyo? Mtu ana magari 20, amemwandika mtu kila asubuhi anaviwasha tu, hata havitumii. Sio ni upwamu huo? Ni ulafi tu, si uroho, si ulafi, ni upwamu, ni unguruwe huo. Na ndio anaizungumzia. Na swala la tatu ambayo mzee amelizungumzia ni swala hili kwa Kiingereza anakiita prestige. Ndio maana Mwalimu alisema siku za awali, tuna mzee Warioba atakumbuka, sote tuwe ndugu. Wakati alipofariki mzee Nyerere, sasa Watanzania wabunge wakasema, si Wakenya wanajiita waheshimiwa, sasa na sisi pia tuitwe waheshimiwa. Hata mtu akigombea tu, punde tu anapotangaza anagombea, sasa anasema lazima mimi mheshimiwa, na akijitambulisha anasema mimi ni mheshimiwa fulani. Nani wewe? Sisi ndio tunakutambua kama mheshimiwa. Na jambo la tano ulilolizungumzia ni swala la umaarufu. Mtu atafanya kila kitu, atawaita wakina mama wanengwaji, wanengue, atawaita vijana, atawakodi vijana vibarua na magenge la vibarua waje wacheze dansi na waite majina ya kiajabu ajabu. Hilo ni jambo ambalo linamfanya Mwafrika anakuwa na uungu fulani. Na hilo ni jambo ambalo unaona katika hivi alipojingatua kutoka mamlakani waziri mkuu wa Uingereza, siku ya pili anaabiri gari. Hivi sasa ukija katika mataifa mengi tu, nyinyi njooni Kenya muone, tuna watu ambao tunawaita magavana 47. Nikiana nyumbani kwetu barabara hakuna magari, unamuona mtu na bendera na magari 10. Sema sasa, nani anakutisha huku nyumbani kwenu? Mbwembwe na ving'ora tu. Unaona mtu amelindwa na askari 50 na zaidi. Sasa nasema, ikiwa wewe umechaguliwa na wananchi, kwa nini unawaogopa wao? Unalindwa kutoka kwa wanyama gani hawa? Wanyama waliokuchagua. Na vitu kama hivyo ndivyo vinavyochangia mdororo wa kisiasa na mdororo wa kiuchumi. Kwa kuwa kukidhi vitu kama hivyo inatugharimu sisi walipaji ushuru. Na hivyo ndivyo vitu, mnakumbuka mzee Warioba, utakumbuka siku zile za awali Mwalimu akakataa, akasema katika Ikulu ni kubwa mno, nipeni nyumba ndogo tu Msasani. Mtu ana nyumba iliyo na vyumba 20 kwa mwaka, hata hajatembelea moja, lakini ni jambo ambalo akiwa kwenye baa na simua anasema umeliona jengo langu la kifahari. Si ni ujinga tu? Kwa hivyo kuna umuhimu wa viongozi kujinasua kutoka katika minyororo ya utumwa, jinsi alivyosema 3 P's mzee, na ni jambo ambalo ni la busara isiyo na kifani. Nakubaliana na msanii mwenzangu ya kwamba lazima tuhoji swala hili la mfumo. Umejua sisi sote watu ambao ni tishio na hatari katika Afrika ni sisi tulioenda shuleni. Sisi kwa kwanza, fikra zetu ni za kufugwa na zimefugwa katika misingi ya kigeni. Na Waafrika fikra zetu zinafugwa na jamii mbalimbali. Ukiwa tulitawaliwa na Waingereza, kwanza kabisa walikuja wakatubadilisha majina. Umejua jambo la kwanza, hata Mungu alipokuwa anataka kubadilisha, ukiwa Abraham anakuita Abraham, ukiwa Sarai anakuita Sara. Sasa sisi kwanza kabisa, ukiwa Mkristo, wewe ukiwa jina lako ni Nyakulinga, wanakuambia lazima uwe John, ndio jina lako la Kikristo. Ukisha kuwa John, ukienda shuleni unaambiwa Kihaya ni lugha duni, sasa elewa Kiingereza. Na mifumo sasa, ukiangalia katika taasisi nyingi tu, kinachofanyika ni ya kwamba ni fikra hizo za kufugwa. Wewe tuangalie, niligusia swala hili la Wachina. Kwa nini Wachina, sijui kama katika chuo kikuu cha Dar es Salaam kuna taasisi ya Confucius. Wana maono ya ajabu hawa. Katika kila chuo cha Afrika kuna taasisi ya Confucius, kwa kuwa kile ambacho wanataka kufanya ni kutupa fikra za Kichina. Na hivi sasa sisi ambao tumeenda shuleni, ukimuuliza mwanako sasa ni lugha gani unataka kuisoma, kwanza ilikuwa ni Kiingereza, Kifaransa na Kijerumani, sasa ni Kichina. Na katika siku za usoni sote tutakuwa Wachina wadogo wadogo. Hata tukienda kubatizwa utasikia mtu anasema mimi ni Deng Xiaoping Nyakulinga. Umejua swala hili nalizungumzia kwa utani. Kumbukeni ya kwamba Wachina walikuwa na sera fulani ya kusema ya kwamba Wachina hawazai mtoto kuzidi moja. Sasa wamebadilisha, wanasema wanaweza wakawa na mtoto wa pili. Na nilisema ya kwamba huyu mtoto wa pili anaandaliwa. Huyo mtoto wa pili ndiye atakayefanya katika nchi za nje ikiwemo Afrika. Mimi nawaenzi sana watu hao kwa kuwa wanatambua ni kitu kipi wanakitaka na wanakifanyia kazi. Sisi wa Afrika, jambo la kwanza nasema na kusisitiza ya kwamba tunahitaji mikutano 4 kule Addis Ababa ya viongozi wote, tuna taasisi wakilishi wote, na katika mkutano wa kwanza swala mama iwe ni kitu kipi kibaya. Tukisha lichokoza hoja hiyo na kuidadisi, tuwe katika mkutano wa pili tuseme baada ya kutambua kitu kibaya tutalitatua kwa namna gani, na mkutano wa tatu tutautatua kwa njia gani, na wa 4 kwa muda gani. Tukifanya hivyo, kwanza tutamtambua ya kwamba kuna makabila mengi. Tukisema ya kwamba Waafrika tuungane, hatusemi ya kwamba tuwe na mila na desturi zetu tuzitupe nje. Tunasema lash, Wayoruba wawe Wayoruba tu, Wahaya wawe Wahaya tu, Wakongo na wawe Wakongo tu, lakini tukumbuke ya kwamba vitu tunavyovitaka kama Waafrika ni sawa. Mwafrika anataka chakula kizuri tu. Si Mwalimu ndiye akasema ya kwamba vijana ni kuwa na siha bora, malezi bora na bongo kali. Kwa hiyo jambo la kwanza tunataka kula vizuri. Tunataka shule nzuri. Tunataka miundo msingi na miundo mbinu nzuri tu. Tunataka tuwe na mahospitali na mazahanati nzuri. Hivyo ndivyo vitu ambavyo tunavitaka. Tunataka tuwe na ajira kwa vijana wetu, ili kijana wa Kitanzania akipata fursa katika nchi ya Liberia iwe ni rahisi kwenda huko. Umejua katika nchi za Ulaya kilichoko ni ya kwamba vitu vya msingi haviwasumbui kijana. Kwa kadri kijana ambaye ameletelewa katika nchi ya Norway akisema ya kwamba kula ni ya kwamba alikula sosiji 2 tu, lakini Mwafrika akikwambia sijala kwa muda, huyo mtu anasononeka, hajara hata maji hana. Na ninakubali ya kwamba vitu hivyo vitashughulikiwa tukiwa na taasisi ambazo zinalenga mila na desturi. Mwalimu Nyerere kasema ya kwamba wacha Waingereza na Waamerika waende katika sayari za mbali, sisi wa Tanzania na Waafrika tufikishe maji ya bomba kwenye miji. Wacha wao wawe na ndege za kiajabu ajabu, sisi tuwe na chakula mezani. Hivyo ndivyo ambavyo tunavihitaji. Hata na katiba zetu hizi tunazozizungumzia, tuangalie na kubaliana nawe ya kwamba lazima tuwaulize wananchi washirikishwe, na inawezekana hivyo, na tukikutambua hivyo itakuwa ni jambo nzuri tu. Mwenzetu nitamjibu kwa lugha ya Kiingereza kwa kuwa anatoka sehemu za Nigeria. I agree with you. If you listen to me very carefully, it means that I'm conflicted. There was a time when I thought, and I'm still not clear whether my thoughts are clear on this point, that term limits are a good thing. I think no matter how good a dancer you are, you must leave the stage. No matter how good a dancer you are, you must leave the stage. And I think, and Mzee Wariobe, I'll come back to you because you are there. When Mwalimu wanted to leave office, there was no shortage of people telling, Mzee utatuacha mayatima. And Mwalimu was clear that this is the time to leave. You must know when to leave. In fact, the best time to leave is when people say they want you to stay. And I am conflicted in the case of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni and Paul Kagame for historical reasons. Rwanda has come out of a very difficult history. And for that reason, the institution, the personal presence of Kagame has been very useful. But I now hold the view, and I said it in Rwanda the other day, that this should be the last term of Paul Kagame, so that he can even have a puppet, so that people get used. The mere fact that people see another face is good enough. It demystifies power. And I think that that is a good thing. President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, with whom I have had a conversation and raised the same question, I hold the view also that this should be his last term. In other words, there is a sense in which they have overstayed a little. They have overstayed, there is no doubt. The reason why I have a problem with President Mugabe is because he has stayed for too long and institutions have suffered. In the case of Uganda and Tanzania, there are economies they are worth talking about. There is no economy in Zimbabwe. You go there. It is the first country in the world that does not know which currency to use. At one time they were using the yuan. At one time they were using the rand. At another time they were using a bond. At another time they were using the American dollar. President Mugabe was a great man, an intellectual, but he stayed for too long. No matter how good you are, if you stay for too long, you spoil it. A good dancer must know when to leave the stage. That is why I'm passionate. And it also gives me an opportunity to say something about General Buhari, about political hygiene. General Buhari inherited a very difficult country. And I want to say, the day Nigeria wakes up, Africa will never be the same again. Nigeria, with a population of nearly 200 million, 300 million, Nigerians cannot even agree on a census. They don't want a census because they don't want to discover that the Fulani are more than the Yoruba or the Yoruba more than the Igbo. They think that that discovery is a dangerous thing. So Nigeria must make a decision, and I think that President Buhari, it's unfortunate that he's unwell. But look at the short time that he has been there. Nigeria, the budget of Nigeria is going to be financed by the money which was looted by individuals. You can see the fight that is coming out there, but it's not going to be easy. In fact, he said that if you threaten, kumbukeni ya kwamba mafisadi ni watu wa ajabu. They have the patience of vulture, these corrupt individuals. They wait for you. So Nigeria is beginning to move in the right direction, but once again, you remember last week, the Oduduwa Republic, which is the Yoruba-speaking states, gave a warning that if by October the Igbo still continue talking about Biafra, they shall be expelled from all Yoruba states. The northern states also said the same thing. That is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for disaster. Ethnicity. And I'm using this occasion to overextend my answer by also giving South Sudan, John Garang Dimabior. Right now, if you go to Nairobi in Kenya, all, if not all, but a good number of cabinet ministers in Sudan live in Nairobi, and their children are either in Nairobi, Addis Ababa, or Kampala, or Europe. South Sudan is a hunting ground where they work on Fridays, steal money, and invest elsewhere. That is not leadership. Now people are fighting the Nuer and the Dinka in the 21st century. One is saying that it is possible if we do what we did. Suppose President Kiir were to have weekly meetings with Vice President Riek Machar. They would resolve all these things because the people are always helpless. I can't agree with you more on that particular. And I think the last question is swala hili la kuhodhi maarifa and national ethos. I think there is not a single leader in Africa who spoke about a national ethic. There is an example that I've given. It happened to me when I used to come to Tanzania every other time with Jukwaa la Katiba. So I used to come every week. So one day I'm at the airport in Dar es Salaam and I have my little bag, and I wanted to have it on as a carry-on bag. And they told me, no, you've got to check it in. So I went to a young man who was selling padlocks. Kaniambia, wewe Mtanzania? Kasema, mimi ni Mkenya bana. Unarudi nyumbani? Kasema, narudi nyumbani lakini nahitaji kufuli kwa kuwa wameniambia lazima niweke kwenye nanio ya mzigo. Kaniambia, unaenda Nairobi? Sema, nunua kufuli 2, wezi hao. And you know, I keep on telling that because the attitude of the average Tanzanian about Kenya ni ya kwamba ni mwizi. And I asked Tanzanians, Kenyans, what do you think about Tanzania? And they say they are polite and too slow. But it's better to be polite and too slow rather than to be a mwizi. So that is the perception that we created, and it was created because Nyerere had ethos. One day I'm in Tanzania, and a young girl, I asked for a soda, Coca-Cola. Sema, dada, naomba unipe Coca-Cola. She came back 10 minutes later with Sprite. Kamwambia, na sasa dada, si niliomba Coca-Cola. Sema, si soda, ni soda tu. I just laughed and took the soda. And the moral of my story is that when you come to hospitality, Kenya is number 1. A hotel industry, we do very well. But I was so amazed by the politeness with which, if it was said, the Kenyan would say, we kunywa soda wewe. The difference is Nyerere created a national ethic and ethos. Your typical Kenya will say, nataka maji. Mtanzania asema, ndugu naomba maji. Sometimes we joke that even the Tanzanian policeman, when we want to arrest you, say, naomba nikutie nguvuni. How can you omba tutia mtu nguvuni? Unamtia nguvuni. And I'm saying this in jest. Mwalimu Nyerere was talking about ethics, and today, when you look at Azimio la Arusha and the 10 points, is that not what everybody is talking about now? All these TAKUKURU, all these anti-corruption authorities, all these integrities, we have gone back to Azimio la Arusha. And I'm saying that there are things there that we can look at and begin to inform our leadership. And lastly, I want to talk to young Africans. I see young Africans here. Professor Mlama, the VC, the DVC, Mzee Warioba, have done their bit. This is a relay race. The question is, and I know that there are Christians here, if you look at the Bible, there is a man called Simon. When he had been told that Christ has been born, he said, now I can die, because I know Christ has been born. Can this generation say that of you? That now they can die? Can we leave Tanzania in your hands? Will it be safe? Or you will want to make it the 52nd state of the United States? That is the question. And even those of you who are from the Muslims, many Muslims here will know the great hadith writings of Abu Huraira. When the Prophet had been poisoned and he was dying, the comfort of the Prophet is that he had his Sahabas. You who are here, are these your Sahabas? Will they sell us to Europe and America? The question is yours. Choose you now. The Chinese have chosen. They are coming here, and they will be here. There is a phone that I acquired recently called the Techno. In the next 5 years, out of every 10 phones, 9 will be Techno. China knows what it wants. We are 1.3 billion Do we know what we want sisi wa Afrika? Au in the words of Nyerere, tunabaki kushangaa na kudua tu? I know it can't be done. When I listen to you, who is an artist, and I know you are either below 30 or below 35, I was refreshed. The former president of Sierra Leone, whom I did not like for many things, but I liked him for one thing, he said that in Africa, a journalist with a pen in his hand is like a warrior with an AK-47. He can use it to protect or to destroy. Africa is a fragile continent. What Europe and America can withstand, having gone through different decades of civilization and civil wars, sometimes the multi-ethnic African communities cannot survive. The artists in Africa must be a lot more careful. You must use the tweets a lot more carefully. You must use the Facebook a lot more carefully. You must use all those mediums a lot more carefully. Because in recent history, we have seen the radio being used to cause genocide in Rwanda. So you, the artist, remember what Shakespeare said. Oh, you giant, or you lion, you have the powers of a giant, but use it carefully. Because he who is powerful must know how to use the power. So you African artists, you must choose what to say and what not to say. In other words, without compromising your freedom, you must choose what to say. Just like when you are reporting a death, when you are telling me that my father is dead, you don't come and say, mzee wako, yule hayuko tena, amekufa. No, you come to me and say it differently. And I conclude with this example. There are two ways, those of you who are Christians, of passing an information. There is the way of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was shouting to Herodias, oh, you adulterer. And ultimately he was arrested, and Salome asked for his head. And that is the end of the story. But there was another prophet in the Bible called Nathan. He went to David and told David, oh, King David, there is a man in your kingdom who is very poor. He has only 2 goats. And there is another one with a lot of goats. But this one with a lot of goats, he has taken from the man who has only 1. And David said, who is this man that he may be punished? And Nathan said, King, that man is you. You must make a decision on how to say things. The only young man whom I would have loved, please, to ask a question is that young man who raised his hand throughout and was never recognized.
So,
yes.
Okay, karibu.
Thank you so much, Professor. My name is Joram Kumbi. I come from ALF, Africa Youth Leadership Forum. And I've been in Kenya attending the National Prayer Breakfast 4th time, meeting the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta. So my question is to you, what have made you special? And what moves you forward as a professor? Because I want to become like you. You have said life is a relay race, handling the baton to the next generation. And if you allow me, because you are the true son of Africa, I have a gift for you. A map of Africa. And thank you for painting our hearts green. I have a gift for you, Professor, if you allow me to.
Please. I didn't know he had a gift for me. So